Joining us today, Holly Harris. You and I have known each other now for, I don't know how many years it's been. It's been a lot of years.
Yeah.
But you worked at Phoenix Staff initially, so you know the
Yes.
agency side, and
Very
then
much.
5 years at Visa
Mhm.
as technology recruiting and diversity inclusion. I don't know, did you start the diversity and inclusion area?
I wish I had that credit under my belt. No, but I worked to bring the Austin site to Austin Pride, for the first time, and did some co-chairing for our Pride ERG, and was on the board for the Austin Women in Technology ERG, and now I'm just kind of an accomplice in inclusion and diversity activist.
I like it. I like
Yeah.
it. I like it. Well, you are here today. I know you've got a PowerPoint present or a slide deck for us on resume gaps. So we're going to talk about that first, and then we'll get into just some of the questions that people will get in a standard interview, and see from a corporate recruiter perspective how you would advise people to answer those.
Sounds great. Look forward to it, and bear with me on my multi-device usage right now to get this done. So let me know if you see any glitches on your side, Alan. Let's see. All right. So good afternoon. I hope you all are feeling healthy, safe, mentally well. I've been looking forward to this event. And I mentioned, as I said, I've got multiple devices going on here, so just bear with me if any challenges come up. Appreciate the introduction from Alan. I've been a professional technology recruiter, currently practicing my craft everywhere you want to be, or, Visa. I do have 10 years of tech recruiting experience. And at Visa, I recruit for cybersecurity's governance, risk and compliance, and identity and access management departments, along with the planning and program management department in operations and engineering for all of North America. I know that's a mouthful. And I give you that understanding of my background so that you will understand why I have the opportunity to comb through thousands and thousands of resumes a year. And some of them stand out for better or worse. So you may be inclined to think that a gap on your resume or CV is for the worse, but that's not necessarily the case. And how you elect to communicate that gap may make all the difference in the world. And it can be the difference between a recruiter like me picking up the phone and calling to understand more about your experience, or rejecting your resume altogether. But you can take control of the gap in your work history and what it conveys about you. And that's actually one of the definitions of recovery, which is the action or process of regaining possession or control of something. So if you have a gap in your work history, you get to control what it says about you. So there's some common gaps as the result of a person stepping away from the workforce. It might be to bear or adopt and raise children. Might be to focus on aging parents whose care demands part-time or full-time caregiving responsibilities. Other gaps may be due to returning to complete a higher degree, live abroad with a military spouse. And for you, COVID-19 might be actively carving out a gap in your resume. So your full-time job is now about getting another full-time job. Did you start your own company? Maybe ultimately it didn't take off like you wanted it to, or maybe you took a personal sabbatical or a personal hiatus because you recognize that you're going to crash and burn if you didn't take a break. And if I guess one thing I really want to point out is COVID-19 is carving a unique gap. And I know Alan and I've talked about this a little bit, is now is not the time that people are going to be saying, why are you out of work, right? If you've been out of work preceding this time period, that's another question. But right now, no one's going to be saying, why aren't you employed right now? So my point in this is that these gaps can range from weeks or months up to years and decades. And those weeks don't need explaining. Right now doesn't need explaining, but more than a few months, more than a few years do. And especially if those gaps occur outside economic downturns, such as the one that we're in right now. So if you take away, anything from my session today, is that I want you to believe that there's great honor in having a gap on your resume for reasons like these. And if you work it right, the recruiter, with lenses sharpened to weed out the riffraff unmitigatable risks, BS, will actually see your gap for what it is, a compliment or a continuation of your respectable career evolution. So for example, you, a software engineer or a project manager, you decide to follow your significant other to fulfill their dream of serving with Doctors Without Borders. You live abroad for a year where you didn't officially hold any software engineer or project manager title, or even any employment that shows up on a W-2. But what did you do there? Did you get involved in your new community to learn the culture? Maybe create an access database for your local library? Did you start an after-school tutoring program for the neighborhood kids? Maybe teach some English or teach some coding? If you did, that's awesome. And you need to include that in your resume and be specific about what you did in terms of how it translates to a business like mine for that lead software engineering or program manager job that you're seeking back here in corporate America. These are experiences, these are incredible experiences, and these contributions can be worded in such a way to convey applicability and relevancy to your professional expertise. Because you didn't step away from your career, you applied your skill set to a new role. And it doesn't matter that you didn't clear the six-figure salary that you normally would. You still worked, and for incredibly noble causes. So let's take a break. Let's take a moment to kind of run through a scenario. So you think, I only pro bono tutored a group of 8th grade girls in my neighborhood that turned into an after-school coding camp. But if you phrase it upright, your hiring manager, my hiring manager, could see this. It's the same thing, but it's packaged up in a way that showcases your skill set, shows the reader that your experience may complement the culture of an organization. So you got to be mindful of the phrasing and the word choice. Be very intentional. You want to guide the reader or the scanner, if you're someone like me, to see what you need them to see. So you want to use action words. So if we'll look at this example here, custom design, execute. Execute a scalable program that fills a gap, elevates, empowers, fosters, actively honing, reviewing. These are all action words that show I did X, Y, Z, and I delivered on X, Y, Z. This is a resume sample excerpt. Actually, I wrote it for this presentation. And middle school community coding camp founder and instructor. Here's the gap period that you did, October 17th through August 18th, and you did it again, August 2018 through December 2018. You created the hands-on coding instructional after-school program and framework. You taught HTML, CSS, JavaScript, Bootstrap, Angular, etc. Somebody like me, I'm always scanning for those kinds of words for the jobs that I'm looking for. I scan them, I see them, makes me want to read the whole thing. Designed a competitive coding challenge for small, diverse teams, mentored those teams, motivated the students to complete their learning journey, very responsive to individual student needs. Very different from, I ran an after school, daycare, blah, 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 blah. You're not lying. You're packaging this up the way that it needs to be understood and helps that hiring manager and that recruiter picture you doing what you've described. And then we take that image and we transfer it over to you working with HTML, CSS, JavaScript, Bootstrap, etc. in my role at my company, making that six-figure salary.
Hey, Holly, I don't know how deep you are into the presentation right now, but I can see the slides, but apparently no one else can.
Oh, well, that's a bummer. Let's see. I wonder how far. Let's see if I fix that. Hold up. Thanks for the heads up. Hold on a second. I should be presenting. Give me a moment. Share screen. It wasn't sharing again, so I'm not sure how long that took.
There you go.
All right. Okay. Thank you all. Let me pull this from beginning.
And I don't know that anything you said other than the resume point.
Yeah.
I really think everything else came through loud and clear. That was when I
Yeah.
heard about it, when somebody thought you were visually showing something.
Yeah, it's just supplemental for sure. The content's definitely in the presentation. So I'll just kind of scroll through here. So, you can see, I think this is really important of the visual. You think I only, did the pro bono tutoring, for my neighborhood kids after school. But what we really want our hiring manager to see, if you did that, is this: custom design, execute a scalable program that fills a gap, elevates and empowers others, that fosters diversity and inclusion in the STEM field while actively honing, coding and reviewing, et cetera, et cetera. That's the difference in the write-up. And then I was using the resume sample excerpt that I created for this imaginary person who did this middle school community coding camp founder instruction during this date period.
Click on that slide, Holly, because we're not
Yeah.
seeing that slide. I don't know that they are.
Is that better?
No, still only seeing the first one, the title slide.
Weird. All right. Well, let's just keep talking, and you can have the presentation deck
Sounds
if you
good.
want. And
I'll send it to everybody just so you
perfect. Yeah, no problem. It's just especially the last two slides, I think, or the middle two slides, are just a really good example of when somebody says, oh, I only did X, Y, Z. But, if you package it up really well, then this is what they actually see. And I think having an example, to draw from is what, folks really need to take it to the next spot. So thank you. Sorry about the presentation.
No, it's all good.
Yeah. Being willing to be vulnerable is also, I think, really important for someone like me on the phone. And what I mean by that is your resume gap could be due to you stepped away from your own career to manage your parents' care in hospice. You also got to spend those last precious weeks with them. Though not in significant detail on your resume, you should share some of that with your recruiter. And I know that puts people in a really high sense of vulnerability, and not every recruiter is created equally. I'm not saying you should broadcast that, across LinkedIn or across your resume in intimate detail. But when you share that with me, we've been on the phone, we're talking about a job together. I'm trying to understand what's been going on in the career background and how your skill set and your character and your integrity, all those things can fit in my environment. When you're willing to share a little bit of that detail with me, I very quickly come to believe that you are selfless, resilient, adaptive, that you work productively and collaboratively with a variety of people in highly emotionally charged situations. And those are attributes and skill sets that my hiring managers and I desperately want on our teams. And now I can better advocate for you. But if you did keep those Java skills as sharp as possible while you are doing something else other than being a full-time software engineer, list those lynda.com classes that you took and those hackathons that you participated in, because we're going to test you on those skills later, but you need to fill your gap with meaningful content that make me want to get you into that code pairing interview. Research reveals that women in particular will not apply to a job if she doesn't meet 100% of the job requirements. And we're very literal about our own qualifications for a position. So here's a few bullet points, for example, from an essential function of a project analyst role. It's pretty straightforward, pretty common: work closely with cross-functional groups, bring a customer-minded focus, assist with management, project scope. I don't have to read it all to you. I know you actually can't see, but you can picture probably what a typical job description reads like. When you're reading that job description that you're interested in, my encouragement is that before you write it off altogether because you think that you're missing a few bullet points or that your experience isn't that recent, I really urge you to mentally step back before you click away. Really think about your experiences holistically, and think about the fact that many things that we do have a start and an end target date. There are meetings with stakeholders, budgets, communication cadences, deliverables, and naturally you'll want your resume to align with the requirements of that position for which you are applying. And I'd wager that when you volunteered your expertise to help automate some process for the New Village Well, or you were working with those close cross-functional parties, product vendors, international donor orgs, construction workers, city regulators, you were planning, you were designing, you were developing, you were delivering a solution in part or in whole. And for a lot of companies, this experience can be exchangeable or translatable to their requirements, and it makes you a very strong candidate for consideration. So in conclusion, there are 3 learnings I really, really want you to take away, and that is, first, be proud of your life experiences and honor all of it in a meaningful way. If you don't fill your resume gap, others will do it for you. And your resume gap may make you feel vulnerable, and even that vulnerability may help me to advocate for you to translate your career pivot or break into a value-adding ROI for my company. I did have an extra slide here to help you kind of kickstart some of the volunteer and or upskilling opportunities. One of them, upgrading your LinkedIn account, gives you premium access to free to lynda.com that's now owned by LinkedIn. There is a free code camp, how to get started. Maybe you've been thinking about offering something for the neighborhood kids, those that are sheltering in place with you, or at the same time as you are, maybe starting something. A lot of that's done virtually nowadays as well. There's online volunteerism opportunities. There's a really cool org, I really like it, Volunteer Match, which includes virtual opportunities. You can put in your skills and your criteria and your timetable and when you're available, and they will match opportunities to you based on that. So it's really on your timetable. And then just meetup.com, Allen and I, we're huge fans of that, I know. Learn a new skill, network in the community. It's all virtual at this point. So you have a lot of control over who and where and how you meet. So that's it. Questions?
That's awesome. No, that's awesome, Holly. I appreciate that. And yeah, I mean, the resume gap deal is, it's a big deal, and I am curious. So I've got a lot of questions based on what you just said, and I encourage others, please go into the Q&A, go into chat, wherever, and ask your questions as well as they come up, and I'll stop my talking and grab your question. But you had mentioned, COVID-19 obviously is going to create a lot of resume gaps.
Yes.
There's going to be a lot of people who, find themselves in a situation they've never been in. Mm-hmm. What would you say, what makes you review a resume and call a candidate that has a gap that wasn't COVID-19 related? Like, what do people put in that gap, or what do people say there to prompt you to reach out to them, whether it's 5 months and it happens every 2 or 3 years, or whether it's 5 months at the beginning of 2019 and it just really seems unexplainable to you that the beginning of 2019 they would just not be working for 5 months?
Yeah, so I take a look at the holistic resume, meaning, do I see consistent technology stacks or either on jobs on the same level or that show kind of a progressive career trajectory. So I first try to ascertain if this person seems to have a skill set or a set of skills. They're not just a jack of all trades, which is not inherently a bad thing, but for specialized tech roles with domain expertise, I typically need something like that. So if I can establish that, then I start making kind of some surmizations, if you will, some assumptions. I'm like, okay, maybe they're consulting, if they're, if I see like something in the risk and cyberspace, then I'm going to think, well, maybe they're with the likes of Deloitte. Maybe they've been with the Big Four, right? Consulting's super common. People burn out really quickly on the road warrior, stuff that they have to do. So maybe they do a 2-year stint and then they take a break, and they do a 2-year stint and they take a break, and they're tired of that. So they're looking for something, full-time, a little more stable, a little bit less, maybe not less demanding, but more work-life balance, right?
Right.
I think if you're in technology, work-life balance, it's more like work-life integration. So if they've got, I think the thing that would keep me, to answer that, Allen, would be, the thing that keeps me from picking up the phone is if I just see all this random stuff here and there and all these different industries randomly here and there. And then they have these weird gaps, not in a consistent cadence. Because now I'm thinking, you're indecisive, you're flaky, you can't make up your mind, you don't have follow through. When stuff gets hard, you bail. Like, that's the gaps that I start filling in, and I'm like, next resume. And I make these assessments in a matter of minutes. These are not 30-minute, chunks of time I'm spending on a resume.
Yeah. Okay, so we just got a question.
Sure.
Thanks, Brian, for asking this. Brian said, so right now, what gap is too long? Personal example, he's been in transition since February, and he wants to know, should I put side gigs, part-time consulting on the resume or LinkedIn, or do I lead with my most recent full-time experience that is very recognizable brand name company?
That could go either way, honestly. That's a really narrow gap. February is leading up to the COVID-19, hit. I would fill the gap and lead. I would fill the gap from February and then have your most recent employment.
Okay.
That's how I would do it. But
Okay.
you know what? You poll 10 people on these things and you get 10 different opinions.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. You and I both know for sure.
In fact, my partner had me do her resume a couple of years ago, and I reviewed it, and then she did something, and then she came back and said, I want to do something a little bit different. Can you review it again? I did. And she said, you had a different comment about this thing. And I said, I have a different opinion about it today. So she was a little irritated with me. Don't recommend doing your spouse's resumes. Outsource that if you can. But great example of, kind of way the wind blows on us a little bit.
For sure. Yeah. And that's the cool thing about these banding together webinars is we've had so many differing opinions, and I think it's great. I think it's very useful for people to hear it from different perspectives, because
absolutely,
that's how you get good at what you do.
Yeah. And that's kind of the beauty of the diversity and the inclusion piece, right? Is that not any one company or any one recruiter at X company is like, it must be boom, 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 boom this way. Or if you do have a really particular hiring manager, I've had one who will only look at resumes with one page. And her logic was, if I can fit my 30-year career on one page, so-and-so can with 10 years. I can't really dispute that. But then as that recruiter, when I see this awesome experience and background, and I know my hiring manager is disinclined to look at it just because of something like page length, which honestly is a very particular preference, I can go to that candidate and say, hey, this looks really cool. I like what you've done, but you need to make this concise, right? And that's the beauty of also having a really strong advocate and a good recruiter, because we're not all created equally. You and I have seen some of the worst ones, but we've seen some of the best. Yep,
for sure. You bring up another point that actually was brought up in last week's webinar, which is just from a male-female thing. Men apply, I think, when they feel as though they hit 60%.
Like 60%? Yeah.
And I would I would probably say it's even less than that a lot of times. And women won't apply unless they see themselves as 100% fit. I saw a posting on LinkedIn yesterday that made me think about how often this question is asked, because I will typically ask people, what prompted you to apply?
I like that question. Yeah, I want to know what's in their head.
I'm curious if you ask it. And,
I do.
What are you looking for when you ask?
I can tell you what I'm not looking for. Can we do that? That one's easier. It really chaps my hide when I ask that question and a candidate says, I want to work for a great company. X company is a great company. And I'm like, no shit, Sherlock. I work here. It's a top 4, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, give me something good, right? Like, show me that you looked at the job and then you did a little bit of homework, that you really thought specifically about how your skill set could apply for that and why you took the time. Now, our application process is pretty awesome. It's like just a few seconds, a few clicks. Other companies have these massive multi-hour math tests. I've done those, not fun, didn't want to work there at the end of the application process kind of thing. So if you're going to take the time and effort to go through that arduous, repetitious application process, something had to motivate you. So share that with me. But if it's stuff like, I want to work for a great company, you know what else is a great company? Microsoft, Amazon, any other there are thousands of great companies out there in the world. Why do you want to talk to me about this job at mine? Be specific. So obviously you've got me on a soapbox.
No, that's great. And that's great. And this might do it again. When somebody doesn't remember applying to your job.
Yeah, you should fake it, maybe.
What's that?
Maybe fake it, like don't, because all of a sudden you're like dropped down to the bottom of my list.
Okay, so that does matter. I mean, the way they answer, why did you apply to this job? If you're calling them, let's say you're calling them out of the blue, and you say, hey, it's Holly from Visa. you know, I got your resume, looking at you for this, you know, IAM job.
Right. Which is
Curious as to
exactly what
why
I
you
do.
applied.
I give them context. I don't want you to be totally caught off guard.
Right.
Yeah.
So you would say in that scenario, it's probably better for them to craft some answer versus,
hmm
I don't
What job
remember.
did I
Can you
apply
tell
to?
me? Yeah.
Yeah. Because then I'm like, because here's what happens. In my head, I start picturing a spreadsheet, which they obviously don't have, of a list of companies that they've thrown their resume out together. And it's like, not only do they not pay attention, so that's a huge problem if you're going to be in my production environment working on code, to that was the big one. You're not prepared. There's another point I had to make, but yeah, I automatically start filling in why this person isn't organized. And it's kind of like I don't say the clock starts ticking, but every little piece of the experience factors in, and it should for the candidate as well, right? If I'm chronically late to meetings that I've set with you, that's a red flag. Can I not manage my time? Does my org not manage its time? So it happens both ways, right? So it's like, if you're not organized, if you're not prepared, and there are going to be times where you're going to get questions that you're going to be like, wait a minute, wasn't expecting that. And I kind of appreciate that opportunity to kind of see how you pivot and then make the next move from logic point A to B to C to D to E. I don't know if that answers your question. I think I kind of rabbit holed a little bit on that.
No, it definitely does. It definitely does. But it brings me to another point because, you know, given the background that you have, Holly, you've worked on the agency side and now you're on the corporate side. Now, you and I know, I don't know that a lot of the folks on the call know, there's a huge difference between trying to recruit somebody as an agent for a company and trying to recruit somebody when you work for the company. So we don't need to go into those basics
Right.
of that. We don't need to go in great depth there. But could you tell me the confidence, the perception, I guess, of a person talking to you first before they talk to the hiring manager? Do you find it that people have a tendency to, you know, say, this is just part of the process and I don't really want to talk to Holly?
I know what you're saying. Yeah. Yes, I do
through
experience
Holly.
that.
You know, I just need to get past Holly in order to get to the person who actually makes the decisions.
So funny. Yeah, that's a really good point. One of my jobs as a corporate technology recruiter is to protect the time of my hiring manager and his or her team. So what that means is if I can save them 30 minutes, 15 or 30 minutes on talking to riffraff, I'm going to do it. So I know that sounds really harsh, but I take that really seriously because it's like, that's time that hiring manager can be working on their day job, which is not recruiting, even though that's a part of their day job. It's where they can be spending, maybe they need to spend a little bit of extra time with another candidate who's on the fence, but we really like them. That's 15, 30 minutes. I can put them on a call with that person. And so, it's like I had a candidate one time say, they were like, I'm just looking for a company to sponsor me. I respect the desire to, stay in the country that you trained in, that you've lived in, that you've made your home. I get that. Not compassionate to that at all. That's a huge deal, especially right now. But if that's your only motivation and I have to relocate you, I can let another company do that. And I'll come knocking on your door in a couple of years, maybe. So, that's kind of a weird version of somebody who was really prepared with an honest answer, but it wasn't a good answer to the conversation with me. And I was grateful that they were like honest with me because we were going to interview them, except they said that. And I told my hiring manager, I don't think this is a good use of your time. And he said, okay, I agree with you, So that's kind of two examples of two different things in one thing. But yeah, the conversation with me, I don't want to market myself as this staunch, angry, my way or the highway, hell hath no fury. It's not quite like that, but it's more than just a conversation. I mean, the conversation, there's a couple of different ways to do the conversation. I definitely want to check on things like timeline to start a new role and immigration that's if necessary, and motivation and challenges that you're maybe dealing with, or whatever the things are, those kind of basic things that we try to understand. But I'm and I hate to say this too, it's like I want to see the best in people, but my other job is to be cutting through the BS and the riffraff, like I mentioned. It's like I have to kind of assume the worst to some degree, and to when a door is presented to me to go through it, or if a window is presented to me to open it. So that is done to make sure that we spend time with the right folks, and that I protect the time of my business, and that we have a quality experience from start to finish. And the more accurate information that I have, then I can make sure that my candidates have equal and equitable opportunity, right? We all have a process that we have to follow, to interview phases, the skills assessment, whatever it may be. But not everyone is a visual learner, right? Not everybody is an audio learner. And so maybe they need a little bit of accommodation. And, so anyway, I'm kind of starting to
No, I mean,
go in a few different directions.
Yeah, what you're saying though, I mean, we're panning for gold. I mean, that's what we do. And in that process, obviously some is going to wash out of the pan and we're going to lose some.
Yeah.
But it's our job as recruiters, be it corporate or agency, to make sure that we only send legitimate gold forward.
Right.
And if people don't present or show up in a way that makes us think that they're that puts us in a very tough position.
I think it's also an opportunity to, that conversation with the recruiter is to get a lot of insight into the place that you're going to make your professional home, and which is where we spend a minimum of 8 hours a day. We certainly spend that more mental time, I think, at work than anyone would care to admit. And you want to make sure that you have a lot of understanding and insight into that culture. And you got to think about this too, is that the recruiter, we have a partnership, a collaboration, a stakeholder relationship with that hiring manager. And it's really a cool opportunity to be like, tell me how this manager manages their time. How does this person, respond when I have to bring a lot of bad news to my hiring managers, a lot sometimes, right? And we have to craft tactics and in real time figure out how to salvage X or, fix whatever. So I have an interesting way of working with a relationship. It's not all rainbow bridges and, posies or whatever. So I think if you really leverage that time with your recruiter in a smart way, you can get a lot of insight into the person that you're going to be reporting to, who's going to be doing your annual reviews, who's going to help you grow your professional career at that company. You may not be a fresher, but you're moving into a new company, a new environment, and the assumption is that you want to move up or around. You certainly want to make more money doing it. So there's a lot to be gained from a quality conversation and conversations with talent acquisition.
Yeah. So don't disregard that. Don't.
No, that's a short, long story short. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's a real thing. I mean, I think people right now, and especially right now, find themselves in somewhat of a desperation mode. And, they're like, I got to get through this process quickly. So let me not worry about the conversations with the non-decision makers. Yeah. And point being,
they have influence though.
You have to.
Yeah.
So another question, I don't know if you asked this question, but, I am curious about, if you do or how you do, why are you the best candidate for the job?
Yeah, I do that sometimes.
Okay.
Sometimes, or a variation of it. I have a colleague of mine who asks that every time, and it's her favorite question, and because it's just so revealing about how people's minds are working. I think I would say that my female identifying and some of the underrepresented minority candidates, not always am I aware of those classifications, but I've noticed that those folks are far less inclined to answer that question very succinctly. And I think it's because we're cultured, especially I can speak for women, with multiple intersections. We're cultured not to brag about ourselves, not to elevate ourselves above the team. I tend to see or hear, especially my female candidates, say things like we versus I, so the ownership is very different. So I like to ask questions like that, and similar to it, kind of throughout the process. It's not like a regimented, if you will, piece of my pitch, but it's a good question, and I think it forces people. I probably should ask it, and here's why, because it should prepare candidates to really think through what skills and capabilities and expertise they bring to the table, because you are competing with other people. Now, that slate may only be 5 or 9 people, but it could also be like 50 people.
Yeah.
And some of my jobs, I get hundreds and thousands of resumes. It's not fun to come through that, but it's like you do. So when you do get on the phone, you should have something very specific, very curated, very thoughtful, that, and Alan, I've picked this up from being at staff days. It's like the questions about, the questions geared to make the employer, the recruiter, the hiring manager really picture you in the seat of that position doing that role. I think that's very advantageous for a candidate. I mean,
yeah, visualize you in that seat. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to take these in order. We just had a question come in, but there was one ahead of it. So I want to take this one real quick. They said maybe off subject, but would be curious to know if Holly believes ghosting is a practice that needs to be accepted now. I've had conversations, interviews with hiring managers, and I've heard nothing and no response from recruiter or company after following up numerous times. Not even the standard thanks, but no thanks.
Wow. I do not believe, I'll put it this way, no news is never good news, especially in recruiting. Bad news does not age well. So I would say that, to answer that question, ghosting should not become acceptable. I think it's poor practice. Until my products are not people, I should, as a recruiter, and on the other side, the candidate should do the kind basic service of communication.
Yeah, perfect. This question certainly is a tough one, and you and I are both allowed. We're given the option of saying I don't know the answer.
Fair.
Any recommendations for explaining a gap for less altruistic reasons than building a well, having children, or further?
Right, like maybe went to rehab, right?
Like if someone has fallen on hard times for whatever reason, financial, personal issues, mental health, physical health, or maybe
those are
bad life choice.
Yeah. So the question is exactly how to fill that, or how much information to give?
How do you explain that gap?
Personal sabbatical, medical, maybe a medical sabbatical. I would say, the only danger potential of saying medical sabbatical is it could create questions in people's minds, but legally we're not going to ask those questions.
Yeah.
But I would say personal sabbatical, time off, let it lie. And, you can say, if they press, how'd you fill your time? Did you do any studying on the sides? I would, you can say, those, you can go down that pathway. I would at least close the gap on paper as far as saying personal sabbatical, but I don't think you need to give all the details, right? And I would definitely work on doing it in such a way that didn't create too many questions in people's minds.
Yeah.
And not to say that will be used against you, but I think for me personally, I never want to have, it's kind of like having a fragment hanging out. You want to put the punctuation at the end of the sentence to kind of like tie it up.
Right.
So does that answer the question?
I just asked that individual if that did answer the question. The only thing I might add to what you just said is do a lot of research on the person you're interviewing with. Try to find some background, see if there are any keys or any indicators whatsoever that maybe they've had a path that was,
less than traditional, maybe.
Less than traditional.
Yeah.
If you can find common ground in that area, then you may actually have not only the ability to share it, but you may have, some sort of kindred spirit or some sort of
absolutely
leveled
and
field.
That's kind of the vulnerable piece I think I was trying to make is research will help you get some insight into that. To your point, I support that completely, Alan. I mean, don't stalk people. That doesn't go down well, but
Research.
Yeah, research, literally, that's the word. And be discerning about what you want to share. As a fellow professional, having weathered at least 2 maybe more economic downturns, I also took a non-traditional pathway. I didn't go straight from high school into college and graduation and then into the workforce. I was really, really struggled. I have a lot of intersections in my background that resulted in, strained, relationships and, family and whatever it may be. And just having to kind of reinvent myself as an adult, not within the, not that everyone's childhood is really easy, but, my point in sharing all of that is it was hard to go through. It was hellacious to go through some of it. But I am who I am because of those experiences. And I don't think I would be as compassionate, or maybe just step back, take a, thoughtful, I guess is the word. And I apply that same compassion when I'm looking at resume gaps and talking to different people from different walks of life. I don't know what they've gone through, and they don't have to tell me that. But I do know that they live in the world today, and it is a very hard place to live right now. There's a lot of highly charged emotions. There are movements that are ongoing. And so I think the word is create space, or the phrase is create space. Kind of have to create space for people just a little bit, and give them a little bit of grace and mercy, and jump to you're lazy, or or they've been irresponsible, things of that sort.
Right.
That may come to light later, those things, but that's not the assumption going in.
Right. No,
which is, I know, kind of contrary to what I was saying about I have to have these really sharp lens and try to cut through and mitigate risk, cut through risk and mitigate BS, or switch that. So it's kind of a delicate formula that isn't. It's a little bit of science and psychology in there mixed in, if that makes sense.
Well, you're saying recruiters are human too.
We are. Guess what? And artificial intelligence. Yeah, your resume doesn't actually flow through an AI at my company. It's actually, we have to go through there and look through, run a Boolean search in the database, and pull out and extract and look through. That's not a machine doing that. There are a lot of places that use some machine learning, and I think that's a good thing, but that also can only be fed through real accurate data integrity in order to make it a robust or a more accurate conclusion. So we are human, absolutely.
Cool. So I just have two more questions for you. I encourage people. I mean, we've got really good questions coming in. So please add questions there. But I have two more personally for you.
Yeah.
So let's say somebody is not a COVID, not a victim of COVID, didn't get laid off or furloughed or whatever. Mm-hmm. But they're looking for a new opportunity right now. A common question is why? Why are you looking?
Yeah.
Would you say it's even more curious why people are looking right now? I mean, if somebody is looking.
Yes, I'm definitely like, wow, I want to know what that seems courageous.
So what are you looking for in that question then?
What's that?
What are you looking for? I mean, currently, what would the right answer be for somebody who is showing that level of courage?
Something a little bit more than, like a common answer to that is looking for a new challenge, a fresh opportunity. So when you say fresh opportunity, I'm like, what's going on in the current environment? And that's usually my next question is, all right, so is something going on in the current environment? Are you not feeling challenged? Sometimes I'll do a little bit of leading, like ask a little bit of a leading question. But if you're going to go with something pretty generic, like looking for a fresh opportunity, and I'm not saying you're not, but be specific. So you applied to my job or the job. Now it's mine. I've probably given you a little bit of context around why the job is open, or I'm going to, but nonetheless, we're here on this phone today because you either we found you or you found us, right? So be specific about that. I'm looking for something cool. I'm looking for something new. My experienced candidates, more than, for example, my freshers, like, new college grad folks, they are usually motivated by something they don't have or they've had before and don't currently have. And that's really valuable to understand that. It also gives me a chance to say, okay, you're looking for this. This is not really something we have in our environment, but we have X. Or, okay, this is really important to you. Having then, I think, because if you're motivated by maybe a benefit or an aspect of a company's culture, and it's just a bonus that you get to do this really cool, technology, cyber focus or whatever, it can be an insightful conversation, with the recruiter, and that's going to come out with the hiring manager and the team as well.
Yeah.
So if you're looking for you asked me what questions I asked, but kind of to push that envelope a little bit further, when you're in the interview or the conversation with the recruiter, and then even later with the interview with the teams, taking that opportunity to ask very specific questions about, tell me about your day-to-day, operationally, what does your day look like with XYZ? What's the team, makeup, or maybe that's not a good question for the business. It's definitely a good question for recruiting. But getting some insight into the things. So your motivation, and we may know your motivation, but it's not just our job to help you understand. You need to kind of bring your piece as well, kind of set the platform for me to give you information. Does that make sense?
It does. It absolutely does. Yeah. And I was going to ask you, so I want to ask you part 2 of that question.
Okay.
And I'm still going to ask you the second one.
Sure.
What are the wrong answers to that question? Like if
motivation questions?
No, I'm leaving my current job because.
Just anytime you disparage your current company or your current manager, that's just 101. Just don't do that.
Right.
You may have had a really nasty experience. I'm not going to dispute that at all. And I don't like that, but I can't fix that for you at your current environment. Right. So you want to take whatever that negative experience has been. And I want to tread very carefully, because there are some really bad things that happen to people. I don't disagree with that. I've got some co-working back here. Sorry. That's my partner. I don't want to make light of those things, right? And some people don't leave voluntarily, right? They get terminated for whatever the reasons are. But whatever that experience is, you should package it up in a way that you realize why you are willing to go and look for another job. Maybe you were forced into the market for whatever the reasons, but something's motivating you. A common response that I get from especially parents, and I'd say this happens more from women, is they'll say, well, I'm the breadwinner in my family. I need to work. I need to be a good example to my daughter. Okay, I love that, and I get it. I deeply, deeply relate to that. But you need to say something that demonstrates an ROI or an applicability of your skill set to my job, to my business. You know what your motivation is. That's the thing that drives you. But why you over anyone else, right? Yeah. I don't know if that's what you asked me. I think I feel like I rabbit holed again.
I think that's a perfectly
I'm thinking on the fly here, so.
That's a perfectly good answer. So we have one other question from the field here. If you were let go due to a restructure, not COVID, and yet it's interpreted, or you're speaking to people and they're interpreting it, is it misleading to allow them to chase that, or?
No, but I think it's fine to say a restructuring, especially if you are just in the corporate space. It's very common. It's not at all uncommon. It's not something that raises questions for me. In fact, it's usually because people are like, I didn't want to move to, Phoenix, or I didn't want to move to Tennessee or whatever, the job was, made redundant. And that's just such a common reason for why people are in the market that it does not throw a red flag for me at all.
Okay.
It doesn't. So I would say, to kind of answer their question specifically, I don't think it's misleading to kind of ride the coattails of COVID. However, if you're applying for a job, and this is probably something that wouldn't happen, but the job location is X and you want to be in Y, and current climate is such that almost everybody non-essentially is working remotely, and you're going to eventually have to relocate to Y city or whatever, you should be transparent with that recruiter and say, I could have stayed with my other company. I loved what I was doing, but the job was moving to this location and it doesn't make sense for me. I'm firmly rooted to this area. I have a kid in college. I have a kid. Sorry, dogs barking in the background. Life, remote life.
That's
I can't get that to stop. very exciting. My coworkers are going to be reported to HR very shortly. So that was, if you shared that, you know, with a recruiter, then that would help me understand that, okay, you're tethered to this location. You know, let me tell you about the culture of this job site. You know, in terms of internal mobility opportunities, which people are always going to be paying attention to. If you're going to join a company, most people are looking because they want to continue professional development and grow within the organization. Well, you want to make sure that that in current times, you're not going to be limited by a certain location. So I think that there's an advantage to being a little bit more forthcoming versus, you know, the other, which is certainly safe and comfortable. That's my answer though. So it's kind of, it go both ways.
Okay. And I want to inject this real quick. I still have my final question coming up, but someone just said, for what it's worth, she is spectacular and really understands the gray, which a lot of other people do not recognize.
I really appreciate that feedback. Thank you.
I figured you would, so I wanted to share that with you immediately. What questions do you have for me? That's always the last question asked by an interviewer.
I should have been prepared for that.
No. What I'm saying is, during an interview, you're going to be asked, what questions do you have for me?
Oh, yeah.
You and I both know the wrong answer to that.
Yeah. Don't ask about salary first off of the bat, because then I automatically assume that that's your primary motivator. I assume that it's your top 3 to 5, and that's fine, but that should not be the question that comes out that should not be the question that is in response to the question, what questions do you have for me? Right. That's a lot. Not to say it's not an important one, just that's not the one it should be. So you want to say, what do I want to hear from that?
Yeah. What are you looking for? Or I guess number one, you're not looking for, you know, what am I going to get paid? And you're also not looking for, I really don't have any.
Yeah. Or, you know, if maybe we answered them in the course of the discussion, and you can say, you know, I had questions about these 2 things, but we already touched on those. You know, so that's okay to say that, because then I at least know that you came to the conversation thoughtfully prepared, versus, you know, you're just checking this box of this mandatory recruiter screen, you know, kind of thing. And maybe I'm trying to decide if it feels like a lot to ask, to have somebody come in to be so prepared at every phase of the process. But I don't think it is. And not just because we're in COVID times and jobs are, you know, a little bit more scarce, or at least been deferred until later time periods. Because we have to be prepared. You have to be prepared. There's a differentiation here. And what I mean by that is, not every employer is created equally. Not every candidate is created equally as far as qualifications goes. There are some basic things that people need to have, and then there's some preferences that we want. And I would encourage, this is not the answer to the question, but I would encourage candidates to remember that they're interviewing a company as much as we're interviewing them. And so you are doing your research, right? You're being prepared. So I'm open to almost anything, as long as it's not pertaining to stuff like the basic money and, you know, the immigration question. Because here's the thing, if I had a question about immigration, that would have been one of the first things that I ask you, to get clarity on that. So I would say kind of pay attention to the content of that conversation with the recruiter, because they're going to touch on the really basic stuff that absolutely has to be there, you know, before you move on to the next step. So if that's not been hit on, things like immigration, compensation, timeline to start, I think those are kind of the 3 main ones, motivation, then everything else is kind of fair game. Does that make sense?
It absolutely does. Absolutely does. Yeah. And I want to share one more comment with you, Holly. Sure. Somebody just said this has been invaluable content. Thank you so much for your time.
Good. I'm really glad to hear that. We all need to help each other out a little bit these days.
Big time. That's what banding together is all about.
Yes. I love this.
Well, I cannot thank you enough.
Yeah. And I'm open to stuff in the future. If you get more questions, Alan, just, and you know, feel free to shoot on my way. Definitely open to continuing the dialogue. I'm also active on LinkedIn. So awesome. You can find me there.
Yeah, we're not tough to find on LinkedIn, you and I.
No, I think I'm pretty accessible. I mean, if you search Allen, you're going to be able to find me. So,
Well, thank you again, Holly. I really appreciate it.
my pleasure. Hope everyone's feeling good and take care.
Yes, we'll talk soon.
Talk soon. Bye.
Thank y'all.